Welcome to our Lenten edition of Church Chat. The last few weeks we've been looking at pivotal moments in the Old Testament, but I am happy to welcome Lynn and Randy back with us, and they'll be sharing some insights today. During the 7 weeks of Lent, we will be looking at this devotion guide that we'll be using as a congregation throughout the season of Lent. We're having an afternoon study tomorrow. If anybody would like to come along, that's at 2 o'clock on Wednesdays, or you can do these individually. You can get the booklet by coming by the church and picking them up, or we'll mail them to you if you call us or email us about that. We are on week 1, obviously, and it concerns a sick woman that has been ill for 12 years. And if you read through the scripture, she is hoping to be healed, and so she comes up behind Jesus and touches the hem of his garment. And the Jews believed that there was something special about their prayer shawls. It was part of their identity, part of their daily ritual in how they prayed and how they related to God. And so being connected to Jesus, even the hem, even the slightest touch, was thought to transfer his healing power to her. And in fact, that's what happened. And so as I was reflecting on this and some of the questions, I realized that when the power goes out, I'm at a loss. And computer's off, television is off. My cell phone can only last so long before it needs to be recharged. I'm just like cut off from the rest of the world and not sure what to do with myself. And in the same way, this poor woman who had this affliction, because it involved blood, was cut off from all the religious traditions, observances, holidays, and not only could she not participate, but she couldn't be around anyone else for fear of making them unclean as well. And so she was really isolated and alone. And how lonely that must have felt, and how desperate she must have been to risk going up to this famous rabbi, this teacher, this healer, just hoping to touch him. And the change that must have happened in her life afterward, how she was excluded, and then afterward she got to participate in the full culture of her community and her faith in her country. And so these days it seems like everything goes back to Ukraine, and I think the same thing of the poor Ukrainians who one day were living a normal life, participating fully in community activities and teaching and going to work and driving buses and all the other things, and suddenly all that is called into jeopardy. Suddenly they are cut off. Suddenly they are having to fight for their freedom. And so perhaps as we approach this Lenten scripture about Jesus being compassionate, perhaps we can extend those same feelings and that same compassion to the Ukrainians, to those around us in our family and our neighborhoods who feel alone, who feel cut off, who aren't able to participate fully in the life of the world around them for whatever reason. They certainly need grace and compassion. So hope that helps a little bit with my reflection on the first week's reading, and I'm sure that Randy and Lynn will have some wisdom for us as well.
I started out by learning a trick that Sid often does. He'll give you a verse and then he'll say, before we got to that part.
I've been found out.
So I went back to the beginning of chapter 8 and just made a little list that really emphasized to me how compassionate Jesus was. In this one chapter, he had been traveling with the disciples and women. There were 4 women who apparently had money and kind of kept him going. Then there was the parable of the soils, sharing the light, his mother and brothers and the crowd around him. He calmed the sea. He freed a man from demons, and he healed 2 women, and that was the part that we got to today. The one with the flow of blood, and then Jairus' 12-year-old daughter who had died, but Jesus said, no, she's not dead. So I'm guessing that any of us, if we'd had a time like that and been that busy, and somebody touched us, we would probably turn around and snap at them and say, what do you want? But instead, Jesus showed her compassion. And then the related scripture in Corinthians, I just wrote down that partners in comfort and partners in suffering, that it doesn't always go the way we want it, but God is our partner. And the question, the moment of reflection, have there been times when you felt rejected, neglected, discounted, or exploited? I really couldn't think of too much until I remembered, as Sid was talking just now, I remembered when I was 18, my first year in nursing school, there was a big hepatitis plague on the east side of Waterloo, and Lucky Lynn probably emptied a bedpan of somebody that had it or something, but I got hepatitis. And what I remember most about it was being sequestered in my room upstairs in the house, and if I used the phone, Mother ran behind with a Lysol and wiped it off, and nobody could come in my room, and I did get to the point of feeling pretty much separated and persecuted. Now that's a very short thing compared to the woman with 12 years of suffering, but it gave me some empathy for her. So that's my thoughts.
So many years ago, at another church, I was invited to a Bible study, and that Bible study actually looked at the scripture that we're discussing in Luke. And at that time, I had a very difficult time formulating my understanding of the scripture, of the story, and I had a hard time coming up with a truth to express my thoughts on it. Today, having grown in my walk of faith, I still struggle with that story to an extent. And so I tried to do some research on it, looked at the commentary Bible and so forth, and still struggled. So I tried to write down some thoughts that I had on that story, and hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. So I wrote the one thought that kept coming over in my mind as I was looking at this story was that the God of creation, who at his word brought light into darkness and all things came to be, established order out of chaos by creating natural laws. And he did this so that we could live in a world that had some structure, that had some consistency. Laws that were intended to make our world a little less scary. For example, without the law of gravity, consistently, we would randomly float off the earth and into space. Now, as human beings, we try to bend or alter these laws, but ultimately they remain unchanged. We might harness the wind, but we'll never control it. We may find ways to live longer, but we will all face death eventually. The story of this woman makes me think about the moments when we feel powerless, helpless, even hopeless. We can feel powerless during natural disasters, when we've lost a loved one, and most certainly when we are facing health concerns. And even the non-believers will throw their hands toward the sky and cry for help in such moments. I still don't know much about the woman in this story, but to me it seems that she was desperate. So much so that she was willing to face the scorn, judgment, even ridicule of strangers just to touch the garment of Jesus. The hopelessness of her situation must have been so complete that she was reaching for the smallest glimmer of hope as she stretched out her hand towards Jesus. And I think that in this story, we sometimes forget that the same Jesus whose garment she touched is the same Jesus who was God in the flesh. The all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing God of creation. The same God who created the natural laws and the only one who could break them. Jesus who calmed the storm with his words, who gave sight to the blind, who brought Lazarus back from the dead. One of the reasons I guess I struggle with this story of this woman was during that Bible study, the question came up, why did Jesus ask, who touched me? Being God in the flesh, would he not know who this was? So for me today, I think maybe he did know, but asked the question to draw the woman to confront the situation. If you have ever survived incredible odds, mercifully avoided certain tragedy, or just been given a second chance that you really didn't deserve, then you probably know who to give thanks for that blessing of grace. And then the question is, what will you do with that second chance?
I always appreciate Lynn and Randy's input, and I'm reminded why it helps our church chat to get different perspectives and different ideas on our topics. As Lynn was talking about hepatitis, it was caused me to remember I was a chaplain at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas as a student in seminary, and it's when AIDS was just coming on the scene and nobody really understood it, and everybody was terrified of it. And so there was a few AIDS patients there at the hospital, and to go see them, you had to put on the full gown, the full mask, everything. And nobody wanted to go in and see them. And so I'm sure they felt isolated, just like Lynn had described with the hepatitis. So it can be physical ailments that keep us from relating to others, keep us isolated. Or it can be our attitudes, it can be our habits, our thoughts. There's all kinds of things that can separate us from others and separate us from God. So I hope you've found our reflections today helpful, particularly in the season of Lent. Hope you will join us again over the weeks, and we'll have different stories about compassion, all of them involving Jesus, some of them involving healing, not all of them. Next week is about the friends who bring the paralyzed man to Jesus and how that changes his life. So again, contact us. We'll send you the devotion guide. Come by the church, pick it up, do it on your own, do it with us, and I hope it adds to your Lenten observance, and that'll be meaningful to you as we approach Easter. So once again, thanks to Lynn and Randy for being with us again. I'm glad they're back. And all of us, I hope, will pray for peace, pray for the Ukrainians, and that we will be compassionate to one another and to all.